Good afternoon. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about creating virtual teams and some of the challenges that those teams face. I, along with my team members Lauren Waldo and Kathleen Shelton, are going to focus on some of the unique barriers that virtual teams face on a regular basis. So by nature, most virtual teams are going to they're going to be geographically dispersed. They're going to work in different places. They're going to be, and as Edmondson reminds us, they're going to have cultural differences due to their vast geographic displacement. So some of those barriers then are going to be some of the conflict that relates to teams that don't form a cohesive unit because they don't meet face to face. Of course, with geographic displacement comes language barriers. So, as Brett, Buffar, and Kern mentioned, there's cultural pulls, and interpretations that virtual teams and multicultural teams are going to face. Implied cultural or regional norms, as Edmondson mentions. Also, you have different accents and, some of those things that you have to take into consideration that you don't get a read on people face to face when you're meeting in a virtual environment. And also, as my colleague Kathleen Shelton mentioned earlier, we have, um, she points out that, just doing the basics of emailing and instant messaging and communication, that's at the bottom rung of your communication. And that's not teamwork. That's not virtual teams. That's not teamwork in general. So, video conferencing, you're still you're in the middle of the communication hierarchy, but you're still not doing any teamwork yet because being an effective team requires that you integrate multiple perspectives and leverage the skills that each team member has in managing unique personalities. And these are the qualities that are going to get you to overcome fundamental challenges that teams have and behave in ways that ensure they operate, as Edmondson reminds us, in a psychologically safe environment, which builds trust and so forth. So again, just basic communication. That's not teamwork. Teamwork is really the actual use of skills. So all virtual teams are going to have again some barriers that are unique, and one the most fundamental is the IT problem. That has to be solved first. Technology issues, the Edmondson reminds us the IT, IT is what the foundation of a virtual team. We take for granted reliable internet, fast internet connections, but when those things break down, the foundation of the virtual team breaks down. So you have to solve that issue first. Now, a second comes along, again, as I mentioned, the geographic distances bring in the challenges of time zones. I myself, I work in Oklahoma City. I believe Lauren works in Georgia, and so they're already, even just within the United States, you can see, let alone globally, the things you have to consider. Because I may be eating lunch while my counterpart is just getting to work. So those are the things that all virtual teams need to overcome to be a good, effective team. Now that we've explored the barriers to virtual teaming, let's look at some of the ways to overcome those barriers, and we're going to refer to those as best practices. And through some of the research that I've done from Michael Watkins on the Harvard Business Review, you can see that he recommends leveraging the best communication technologies. And as we know, as we understand, the foundation of any virtual team is its IT and infrastructure. And this is so here what we're going to talk about is not necessarily using the most latest and greatest or the cutting edge, but using the most context appropriate communication technologies. And so obviously if there's a need for visual aid, that you have adequate video streaming and video services, or if just audio is fine, that your telecom is working appropriately. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that everybody you go with the best communication that everybody can use on the same platform. And so the concern here is you don't want to alienate anyone who may not have the same technologies as the rest of the group. So be mindful of that. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is agreeing on a shared language. And Mr. Watkins recommends that virtual teams, as we all know, as quite often cross-cultural teams, are they're not always speaking the same language. And I don't mean English or Spanish or Italian, but on the same page in terms of the context of the team. And so eliminating that ambiguity of, what this particular jargon, industry jargon means, or what this nomenclature or these acronyms mean, but it means eliminating that ambiguity right from the start. Next, we're going to look at clarifying and tracking commitments. And we got off to a great start in our team when Casey outlined from the almost day one the commitments, the milestones, and then we got together as a group and made each other accountable for which segments that we were going to focus on or which segments played into our own expertise. And that's going to lead into our next best practice is fostering shared leadership. It's knowing when to defer to that expertise, knowing when somebody else has more expertise in an area, or knowing when you have the expertise and when it's time for you to speak up and lend your leadership. But at times in your teams, you're going to enter an area where somebody else is going to pull the team in their direction, or you might find in time when it's appropriate to push the team in your expertise in the direction of your expertise. But those are four best practices that I've looked at that I think are going to help you and your virtual teams.